music, I guess. More so, you'd say kind of American hardcore. So I was really influenced by Black Flag and Henry Rollins and Dead Kennedys and that kind of what you call West Coast. It's West Coast, isn't it? It's over on California and yeah. Um, but I was also I really loved what was emerging was hip hop as well. I really loved hip hop, but being a kind of white Jewish guy in Melbourne, it's like we don't make hip hop. Do you know what I mean? Not until the Beastie Boys came along and gave us kind of license and all that. So I was really into. I loved hip hop, and I was always interested in experimental music, avant-garde music, music that wasn't on the radio, I guess. Remember back in those times, we didn't have the internet. You weren't told what to like. The only measure you had was if your parents liked something, then you had to hate it. That was, that was the immediate jump-off point. And my parents were right into disco. I remember I remember the house I grew up in. Our next door neighbours had the first and biggest discotheque in Melbourne. And when they went bust, my father bought their turntables and records and all this kind of Euro disco and and a lot of these records were sealed and they had no there was no text or anything like that. And slowly through kind of my teenage years, I started to discover and like play some because they were all kind of sealed. My parents didn't even open them. My father just bought it as a kind of spare of the opportunistic purchase. So I started listening to that, even though my parents were right into disco anyway and kind of rock and roll. And then I was kind of into art, fine art, visual arts. I was a fucking terrible painter and drawer, but I loved Marvel and DC comics. I was, a fanatic collector, which is kind of unusual in Australia, by the way. It's not, there wasn't that many people who were into comics, particularly the American comics. So I was an avid collector of comics and then skateboarding and all that kind of shit. And I wanted to go and study art when I left high school, but I wasn't very good at it. I loved horror films, and I actually wanted to make exploitation cinema. So I was really inspired by movies of like, George Romero and, John Carpenter and Dario Argento and things like that. And what I didn't realize is that I was really influenced by the soundtracks, and those electronic soundtracks were, they're embedded in my brain. Anyway, when I got to uni, to university to study fine art, I started studying sound, and there I met this thing called the studio and some rudimentary synthesizers and tape loops. We didn't have computers back then. I remember the university had one computer or something like that, and it was kind of a bit of a novelty. It's like, what the fuck is that, kind of thing. But at the same time, in the late 80s is when kind of the whole disco and punk thing, came together in what the English call Summer of Love, or the second Summer of Love in '88, and this house music and techno started to appear. It's like, this was like, what the fuck? Because when you were a teenager, if you liked disco, you couldn't tell your disco tribe that you liked punk and vice versa. So you kind of had like these tribes back then. And so early house and, in the late 80s kind of brought this all together, because there were all these ex-punks right into making early electronic dance music. And the philosophies also applied from each tribe as well. So it was this perfect, dance. And from uni, I started making, tape loops and analog synths. I'm not a trained musician at all. I tried to play guitar when I was a kid, and it's like I fucking hated it because I was really bad at it, and I just wanted to be a punk. So from there on, studying sound, I realized the studio as an instrument was, it's where I started to use the studio as an instrument. And from there, I kind of sent this tape to some guy in a local paper who said he was after like dance music, and gave him this tape. And he went over to Germany. He was a Russian guy, actually became a friend, went over to Germany. Next thing you know, he's got me signed to Kickin' Records in the UK. And I'm thinking like, what the fuck? Like, I know Kickin' Records. I love, DJ Helen. I was like, I literally, I think I just shat myself, right? That I was having a release on Kickin' Records. And yeah, from that, everything just kind of, started to fall into place. I kept going to universities to get access to studios because we just couldn't afford synths or computers at all. So I then went and did a postgraduate and then a master's. And as you know, I've just recently completed a PhD, which I've been doing part-time for many years. But yeah, and I got signed internationally and became an accidental academic because I had been to university for so long. And I realized, about 10, 15 years ago, that people wanted to learn how to make electronic dance music. So here I am. I've got those two worlds, which is, artist and academic, and I brought them together in the PhD.
So, like, what did you do your undergrad and your grad degree in? Just wondering.
My undergraduate was called a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and in brackets, Media Arts. So I went to this particular university because at the start I wanted to do a double degree, which was painting and printmaking and film and soundtrack. But I think by second year, I just looked around at like the visual art and thinking like, the fuck is going on here? And realized there wasn't any new thinking, and it didn't challenge me creatively or philosophically in any way. And I realized that studying film and sound, particularly with a lecturer, Phil Brophy, who's an artist and author and music maker and a filmmaker, and I remember knowing what he was doing before I went to this university and really aligned to his philosophy. And Phil ended up becoming not just my lecturer, but a good close friend and producer and collaborator as well to this day. So to answer your question, it was a Bachelor of Fine Art in Media Arts. And then I did a postgraduate diploma, that's what they called it in Australia. And this is the actual title. So bear with me, sit down. It is a postgraduate diploma in contemporary music technology. That was 1991 or 92.
Oh wow!
And then, and the only reason I did it was it was a different university, La Trobe University, used to have this amazing music department. It doesn't exist anymore, and they had the most amazing synth labs. And I was not traditionally trained, so I cannot read or write traditional music or an instrument. I don't know what the sticks are and shit like that, and I can't play the black and white things. And I got into this program, and they thought I was a troublemaker because a lot of students at that time were using these incredible synth labs. Remember, this is a time before computers could manipulate audio or anything like that. So they were using these synth labs because they could realize their arrangements for ensembles and orchestras. So they were using all these modules and these synths to replicate acoustic instruments so they could hear the piece. Whereas I'm getting in there and I'm just trying to completely and utterly, manipulate and destroy sound and make techno, and a great academic who's originally from California, was Jeff Pressing. He wrote for Keyboard Magazine. An amazing human being. He unfortunately died a number of years ago, and he fucking hated me until something clicked, and he realized, because I couldn't articulate at the time, I wasn't that smart. He realized what I was doing, and you know, he ended up really liking me, and he would actually lend me some of the synths in his collection. He would like let me borrow his Moogs, his rare Moogs and stuff like that, which was great. So after that, I went back to RMIT University, which is the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology University, and I did my masters. And my masters was in media arts, and my master's was a compilation CD that I recorded and produced. But pretty much all the music I composed or I did was either on my own or with some collaborators. So it was a kind of a dissertation on that, on electronic dance music style and sound in Australia, which was that was midnight. That was 95, 96. And that's when the whole Honeysmack thing started to really um, gather some great momentum.
Mm. So how about your name? How'd you come up with the name? Like I read about it, but I'd like to hear the story.
Well, everyone thinks that it has some kind of drug connotation, and it has no drug connotation. I remember when I was making music in the 90s, your your moniker or your artist name was you would change it every week because it didn't matter. You were just pumping out this kind of music, and you almost like created a name, a moniker for this kind of project, and something else, and there was always these new names. And one of the first names I had was Pura, Pura,